Joining me now, well, this is a treat. We haven't talked in such a long time. Finally, we hooked up, is my good friend, used to be from Richmond, now he's in San Antonio, Texas, Ken Ward. He's an investigative journalist, watchdog. Ken, great to have you on, man.
Hey, John, blast from the past. Great to be with you again.
I know. I think the last time I saw you was at the Richmond Legislative Correspondence Dinner. It's probably like 2015, maybe. So it was some time back. But good to have you with us. Happy you're in Texas. Let's talk about one of the hottest races, and you're even covering it from Texas, but you got ties back to Richmond. One of the hottest races in America, which is Virginia 7. Dave Bratt going for a third term against a very good candidate, Abigail Spanberger. Now, you're in Texas, so you're not getting the same perspective that we are because you're a little far removed. What's your take on this race?
Well, a lot of my work, John, has been on immigration issues, and this is something that President Trump used effectively in his campaign. And I believe Dave Bratt is totally tied in on this issue as well, because it resonates with the American public. Immigration is always suppressed as an issue of concern by the elites and the globalists and the liberals and the leftists. But the American people know it's a big issue to their pocketbook, to their national security, to their culture. And Bratt is understanding all that. And it's interesting looking at this race from afar, because I cover the border down here, and I would like to talk about that as well. But as far as Dave's concerned, he understands the economics of the issue and the national security implications of immigration. And it's fascinating to see that his Democrat opponent and the other opponent in the primary just do not even touch immigration. For Democrats, it's like a third rail. It's too dangerous for them and their constituency. They don't want to talk about it. And I think that if Dave's going to survive this race, which is hotly contested, he is going to be able to use immigration as the key wedge in this race.
Well, we're in July, so the really campaign ads and everything, the messaging hasn't really started, other than, I guess, Spanberger's message is she's not a socialist, right? I got that out of her the other day, but which is, puts her in a little bit of a different position than what Tom Perez said was the future of the Democratic Party with Cortez. But look, I mean, Spanberger is attempting to present herself as a moderate Democrat, if there is any more of those. That's what she's attempting to do. Got a background in the CIA. And I asked her if she was in favor of abolishing ICE, and her answer was no, she wants to reform it. But I think, as this campaign goes on, Ken Ward, wouldn't you agree that in the debates that Dave should really make this a centerpiece of his campaign, right?
Yeah, because it's noteworthy that she backs off the ICE abolition movement. And so, frankly, as the rest of the Democratic Party, they tried it as a trial balloon. It failed and flopped miserably. They know the public isn't going to go for something like that. They know it's absurd. So she has to moderate on that position. But she still has nothing to say. I mean, to say reform ICE, well, what does that even mean? As you pointed out earlier, ICE is doing its job. It's the front line of defense. And I think most Americans would rather that ICE do more, not less. So whenever they talk about things like reform, it's sort of like this whole comprehensive immigration reform that they've been talking about for decades, which is just a nice dressed-up word for amnesty. Bratt has none of that. He's not going for any of that nonsense, and neither, frankly, are any of the people in his district. I would like to, mention that one of the things that the press is trying to push now is that with the election of this new socialist president in Mexico, López Obrador, that somehow things are going to get better. I read an editorial out here the other day suggesting that López Obrador is like the best thing that's ever happened in Mexico, and that Trump needs to work with him, and everything's going to be fine. This is, again, kind of the Democrat Party playbook, which is Mexico first, America last. We got a bright new shiny candidate and president in Mexico who happens to be a socialist, and somehow everything is going to be much better as a result. But here in San Antonio on Tuesday, a young man who is the cousin of Obrador's transition leader was arrested with nearly $1 million in drug money that he was trying to smuggle out of the United States and back into Mexico. Turns out that this has been a $1 million a week run that this cousin of Obrador's transition leader has been doing for the past year, every week, $1 million a week in drug money. So the notion that somehow López Obrador is a new guy and he's all, clean and everything's going to be wonderful in Mexico is obviously disproven by this arrest here in San Antonio on Tuesday. The drug money, the drug trade, the drug trafficking, the human trafficking, the weapons trafficking, all this is continuing apace. This young man who was arrested, he's actually the son of the governor of Tamaulipas, which has doubled murder rate in the past 18 months. This is a Mexican state that's right on the border with Texas. So I write about immigration issues down here, the dangers in the Rio Grande Valley, the absolute chaos on the border. We feel it here in Texas directly, but as you know, up in D.C. and throughout the East Coast, we have immigration issues. So ICE has to be involved. The federal government needs to be engaged. We can't just assume that a new Mexican regime is going to be any different than the old regime. I believe it's going to be the same policies, no matter what López Obrador says about doing more on immigration. The Mexicans are just waving through the Central American refugees to come into the United States. They're abusing the refugees, ripping them off along the way. This is institutional corruption that is embedded in the Mexican system. And frankly, that's who's coming up into our country. So all of this comes back to every congressional race in the country. And Dave Bratt is really the only obvious and logical choice as someone who understands the issue in its entirety.
Well, Ken, even beyond that, and we're with Ken Ward. We've only got a couple minutes remaining. We're with Ken Ward. He's an investigative journalist based in San Antonio, Texas, covers immigration issue and the chaos that he says at the border. I think AMLO, which is the nickname for the incoming president of Mexico, I think AMLO is going to be worse, because I asked this question at the press briefing the other day. I mean, he has made two suggestions, and I don't know how far he's going to go with this, but he comes in and he says, you know what, I'm going to seriously consider amnesty for all of the Mexican drug cartels. Anybody involved in the drug trade, I'm going to set a date. I'm going to give every one of them amnesty so we can stop arresting them, looking for them. They're all free to go. Then he says, 2 days ago, this is incredible, he hasn't taken office. He says, I'm going to present to the legislature a plan to legalize all drugs and narcotics in Mexico. So if they get amnesty, they're legal. Now, if either of those happen, or both, can you imagine if both happens, right? Mexico then becomes the narcotic drug trade country in the world, because there'll be no internal measures to stop it, because they'll be free to do whatever they please. The amount of drugs that would pour over the border, what's coming over now, would pale. It would be, 50x pouring into the United States. And, what he wants to do is tax them. So they're actually going to encourage the sale. And I think the administration was caught off guard by this. But I don't know if that's going to happen, Ken. But if it does, or anything even close to that, it could be a disaster. I'm out of time. I want to thank Ken Ward for being with us. Ken, always a pleasure to have you on. Let's do it more often. Thanks for the update and for all your good work in Texas, Ken. Thank you.